describes the return of another old theme, the lover going to the tryst through storm. In the opening it is Krishna who comes, the outward loveliness of the world wooing the poet in high, mighty youth. Was it thou that day came to my court of youth? The flute was at thy fingertips, and silent laughter on thy lips, that day of plf gone mad with beauty's wine. Ah, was it thou in truth came to my side that day? Came in thy bright array to the new-held court of youth? But now the scene is changed. Through the storm is coming neither Krishna, nor Radha her blue robes and wet dishevelled hair, but the terrible god, the one who has won his heart. And the soul exults, knowing what tremendous lover draws near. As Utsarga, though a beautiful book, is in character like a 196 Rabindranath Tagore's selection from his other later books of lyrics, I do not propose to give it further examination. Its chief interest is that it is a porch by which we enter his later lyrical work. The necessity of producing these dedication poems rediscovered for him his gift of song, as light as ever but new in manner, the manner of Gitanjali and Gitai/I. Sisu the child belongs to his desolate stay in Almora. One child, as I have said, was dying of consumption. Another, a boy, was to die not long after. He was a very sweet boy, he who died at Munghir. One the father's loneliness, with the recent memory of his wife's death, and the other shadows darkening his way, found solace in these poems. I had this sick child with me. She was on her deathbed. Do not know why L wrote about children. I used to send the poems to Mohit Babu, who was at Bolpur, and was classifying and publishing my poems in parts. I wanted to include these, so sent them as I wrote them. I used to become the child poet, going back to my childhood just as I do now. I am quoting a conversation of the autumn of 1921 when I am tired, and things are not going well with me. Then I tree with that laugh at himself that his friends know to get rid of my age, and my experience, and my wisdom, and to gc back to my childhood. Siu, when the poems came, was not a new phase in his work. This is indicated by the older pieces that he bound up with it, such as the 7 Kayampi brothers, the rain falls pit-a-pat, the river swells, and the Rira itself. The new pieces are accessible to the foreign reader in the Crescent Moon, from which a fairly adequate notion of Sisu can be gained. The only thing wrong with Sisu is that there is a little too much of it, including a few pieces that are spoiled by being forced and too weakly sentimental. Why Sweet 9 is one of these, with the tenderness not as effective as a greater strength could have made it. Baby's Kingdom 3 is too conversation. Crescent Moon, p18. Ibid, p17. Santan/Ketan 197 self-conscious, and too solemn over the trivial. It is not a revelation from within, but the viewpoint of a man who has resolved to be amused and touched, or so it seems, to me. But the poems fill their place, adding a new note to his work. They abound in delicate glimpses of scenery. The moonlight floating on the jungle of white feather grass, the wild birds haunting the reeds or playing on their muddy margin, the white heaths of a child's imagination, haunted yet created from the actual world. Such pieces as the dedication poem, L. and Farewell 9 carry us beyond the child's mind, into a deeper and more mystic world than any that he can inhabit gnawingly. Baby 8 is suffused with his subtle knowledge of mother no less than of child. No less beautiful, in the same fanciful fashion, is the sleep stealer. Playful Dolores 5 is tenderness itself. Astronomy 8 and the Scientist 7 are compact of charm, the latter especially. The critic 8 laughs at his own futility, and gives a child's point of view. The hero 9 is spirited and true. The book contains 2 of his best gifts, his command of fairy lore and his knowledge of the child and of child psychology. Of the first quality, we get some fine examples. See the lovely finish of play 10 where the old lady of dreams comes flying to the child in bed. She who plays her music to the stars, not he, as the poet, most unwarrantably jerking mysticism into the English version of a beautiful passage, has rendered it as standing at your window with her flute. As for the second quality, it is everywhere. He has a deep Jove of childhood. It is not strange that the crescent moon was felt to be a revelation of a child's mind, comparable to the best that any language had seen. Kia crossing 11 is less easy to accept wholeheartedly, though the execution is everywhere perfect. It is one long wail. I suppose my mind was occupied with the idea of death and crossing. That may have been why I chose the English Gitanjali, 60. Crescent moon, p. 66. Ibid, p. 5. Ibid, p. 12. Ibid, p. 7. Ibid, p. 25. Ibid, p. 45. Ibid, p. 58. Ibid, p. 62. 10 Ibid, p. 9. 11 Kale means a fairy. 200 Rabindranath Tagore. He still falls back thankfully on the known and familiar, yet still I return to the nest, in the same way, with weeping and laughter, still I love FL this varying chant of light and shadow. Lastly, Kia contains a series of lyrics, the coming and the shape of sorrow among them, which are the first drafts of the idea which presently took shape as Roha the king of the dark chamber. These are among his profoundest religious lyrics. The heavy shadow of his recent experience is OER them. Book 4 1905 to 1919 The Gitanjali period 17 Growing Symbolism New Dramas Ke, though published in 1905, was written earlier. In its title Ajit Chakravarti found an indication that the poet knew there was to be a passing over, a ferrying from one bank of the stream of activity to the other, from the practical to the meditative. That is true to this extent, that he was ceasing to be deeply stirred by the ordinary course of current politics and was withdrawing into himself. Yet events compelled him to a fiercer blaze of activity than any yet. In 1905 came the partition of Bengal, which was defended as a necessary administrative measure, dividing a province that was unwieldy, but was taken by Bengalis to be an attempt to kill their new national consciousness, by cutting their land in two. A boycott of foreign goods was established. Political assassinations and dacoities soon followed, the perpetrators generally being students or, at any rate, very young men. Rabindranath dissociated himself from these aspects of the excitement, and in the home and the world made clear his condemnation of the intolerance that was rampant on the patriot side. Today, we can only imagine the effect on this eager enthusiastic people, when their famous poet appeared on their platforms, and with his eyes flashing poured out lava floods of wrath and appeal. There was no man in Bengal whose name was so sure to draw an audience. Even those who disliked his work and were exasperated by his ways were attracted by him. His oratorical triumphs were only less numerous than his poetical. No one who heard it, says Mr. Mahalanobis, can ever forget his magnificent address in 1918, on working as our master wishes. He held 1,500 people spellbound for nearly 2 hours. 203-204 Rabindranath Tagore. He took the lead in many of the characteristic developments of the Swadeshi movement, and his songs set the students astir. The Congress he avoided, attending only once, the first time it was held in Calcutta, when he sang Bandmatari In to his own tune. He used to assert that this strained and ruined his voice, and this was one of the last times he sang in public, except when acting in his own plays. In 1905 he joined the newly formed National Council of Education, for whom he delivered a course of lectures, issued 2 years later as Sahitya Literature. Of the 3 volumes, the first was on Resthetics in general. The others on Sanskrit literature, and on Bengali literature, with studies of Joubert and Tennyson's De Profundis. He helped to found national schools and colleges. He spread the use of weaving looms and lost a good deal of money over them, an unfortunate experience which may have helped to make him skeptical of Mr. Gandhi's Gospel of the Sea, Arki, 116 years later. He was busy also in organizing cooperative societies. All the while, he was speaking and writing with a passionate enthusiasm that even at this distance of time communicates its glow from the printed page. I understand it has been denied that he was on the government list of suspects. I have not seen the denial, he was certainly watched. The poet told me how one day a friend of his went to the Jorasunko police station to give notice of a theft. While he was there, a constable came in, and reported that Rabindranath Tagore C-Class No. 12 had come to Calcutta from Bolpur. After Lord Curzon's Durbar, he received an official letter rebuking him for seditious sentences in his attack on that famous function. It picked out quite the mildest, said the poet gleefully. The poet's political activities ceased suddenly. The national movement had been criticized by him from the first, for keeping social reform in the background. This charge was true, before Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru became its leaders. Even then, the former's urgency that the stigma of untouchability should spinning wheel. Growing symbolism new dramas 205 be removed, past ignored, while bonfires of foreign cloth drew mobs of excited spectators and participators. It will have been seen how strongly social were the poet's nationalist activities. The partition apart, he did not touch purely apolitical propaganda very much, except when his sarcasm attacked the Delhi Durbar. He grew weary and disillusioned, and in one day he resigned his membership of all public committees and bodies and retired to Santiniketan. His withdrawal raised a storm of anger, traitor and coward being the kindest epithets hurled after him. But he kept out of public life for some years. This retirement took place in 1907. Ajit Chakravarty's summary one of what happened, both when Rabindranath plunged into the Swadeshi excitement and when he abruptly left it, may be inserted here, as the opinion of a friend who was very close to all the poet's actions. For 4 years since its foundation, the AS-11 RA-111 went on hum. Ming the old L0 Regotten strain that came from the Pa-5T, from the woodland of Aryan India of 4,000 years ago. Then there burst into the country a thunderstorm. The great national movement with its trumper blast of Bunda Fashierd 1111, its flaunting hopes and high aspiration, its riotous excitement and frantic expectancy, came. The poet became its high PR1ET. The RA 111 was no longer a shadow of the bimted past, it was a 1 rupee. Lighty of the dawning day. The country consciousness surged high in the ashram. Of course, the western features of the shul, e.g. self-government of the boys and the atmosphere of freedom, did not suffer at TL11's period. But the emphasis was certainly laid on the spirit of ancient India. Not simply on the spiritual side of ancient India, but on the side of social life and rucks as well, which were, without question, narrow and convention-bound. Fortunately, the narrow and aggressive lines on which the whole movement was worked out, making patriotism an end unto itself and efficiency the goal of all activities, grew discordant to the poet's growing spiritual life. He suddenly cut himself away from the movement. He sought solitude of spirit, he sought the universal joy of nature, he sought the hidden springs of spiritual life. It was then that many of his longer Giu Janges/I poems were written. Modern Review, July 1917. 206 Rabindranath Tagore. His seclusion was broken by one episode only, a characteristically volcanic eruption upon the outer world, when he appeared suddenly in Calcutta, and made a very determined attempt to reunite the Brahmo sects, and to drive out the Remnants of caste prejudice and practice in the parent body, the Adi Samaj. Nearly 50 years before, Kshavchandra Sen had demanded, against the Maharshi's party, that the Vedi one be open to members of all castes, and the demand had disrupted the Samaj. Now the Maharshi's son renewed Keshav's attack. A Santiniketan teacher was made manager of the Adi Samaj, a room was rented in Cornwallis Street, Calcutta, and a movement started among students. Once again one non-Brahmin occupied the Adi Samaj Ledi. But the Conservatives won, after a bitter fight, and the poet returned to Bolpur. In retirement he entered upon another great creative period, and in 1908 he began to issue a collected edition of his prose. Between 1909 and 1916 he published a series of 17 very small volumes, Santiniketan, religious addresses delivered in his school chapel. His Hebansamriti My Reminiscences appeared in 1912 and was given a fine welcome. Many splendid songs were written, into which the fragrance of Santiniketan mango groves and the benign peace of moonlit night of wandering had passed. Now his latest dramatic phase began, that of the dramas which I feel entitled to call imbolical, for that is what they are, and they are responsible, even more than Jitanjis/I, for the one-sided opinion of his genius that prevails in the outer world. The poet's creations were so real to him that he demurred to any labels. But labels serve a purpose, if we do not allow ourselves to forget they are labels only, identification marks and not full descriptions. Autumn Festival came out in 1908, Atonement in 1909, Ryaja in 1910, The Post Office in 1912. Autumn Festival is the first of a group of plays all in prose, with songs interspersed. Its stage is as simple as Chitrangada's, being just the open air, where wind and sunlight are almost preaching seed. Growing symbolism, new dramas 201 Act 9 Rs, and are certainly the pervading life. It was written for his younger boys at Bolpur. The spirit of festival dominates the whole. It is one of his most successful plays. It never fails to go at Bolpur. One autumn festival, like Philguni later, is almost a masque, in the sense of the word as Milton left it. There is no dancing, though the wild gusty bands of revelers who from now on are a constant feature of his plays, sweeping in nature intoxicated, with songs whose theme their utter irresponsibility, dance in everything but name. Say, then, if you like, that there is no dancing, which makes a slight difference from the class of Comus, but there is an abundance of pastoral accompaniment, of happy atmosphere, of freshness of phrase and feeling. Several friends reappear. He has always been reluctant to turn old pensioners adrift. We have a rebellious king, a miser, an emperor disguised as a sannyasi, the emperor's wise companion, Thakurdada, who represents the wisdom which is in the gift of the fields and mountains, a youth whose character is unformed but generous, and a chorus of boys. There is plenty of symbolism, but no one need mind it as yet. King and emperor both rebel, but in what different fashion. The former rebels against wisdom and righteousness, grasping at power for power's sake. His overlord rebels against the bondage of the material and conventional, the chains with which his earthly greatness has bound him. Autumn Festival might have been composed as a commentary on the text, "Give me health and a day, and I will make the pomp of emperors ridiculous." As the emperor, the wisely jovial throne-renouncing, even though now renouncing but for a day, monarch of Indian and medieval European story, says, "Simply with this rag on my back and a few boys as my followers, I was successful in making this day glorious." To the masque is as sunny as you like it. As with that drama, it is hard to point to underscore passages of definite poetry. The poetry is in the atmosphere, suffuses rather than shines. Its writing must have given the poet singular pleasure. He returned to Mahalanobis. The poet's Owo translation. 208 Rabindranath Tagore it in 1922, when he enlarged it by half as much again, renewing it repayment of debt. Atonement, 1909, was adapted from his early novel, The J.J. Queen's Market, the only substantial addition being the addition of the character of Dhananjaya, an ascetic. In him there is a touch of mysticism, otherwise the play is quite straightforward. Rabindranath played the part of the ascetic, who has a strong family likeness to Thakurdada. It is a real drama. This summary covers part of the facts, but not all. For, though Atonement is a real drama in the sense that its symbolism is subordinated to its action, yet that action is unsatisfactory and drags badly. There are many scenes, usually extremely brief statuesque dialogue, by which the action seems never to get forward. Songs are lavish, the poet having a double excuse for them, in the ascetic and in the character of Vasanthare, 11 a Vaishnava poet, they number no less than 24. The play need not detain us, since its main lines were taken up by the poet, 12 years later, and worked over afresh into the most compact and best of his prose dramas, the Free Karam. There we have again the ascetic, the prince whose mild government has won the affection of the subjects away from his steinfather, the unimaginative, strong, essentially tyrannical king, and the subjects too poor to pay their taxes and encouraged in their contumacy by both ascetic and prince. We have the prince's sacrifice of himself, less drastic in atonement, since he merely goes on a pilgrimage which is the equivalent of banishment, and we have a doctrine of resisting might by power of patient endurance and a spiritual kingdom set over against a material. The last scenes of atonement are impressive with the deep enthusiasm for renunciation sounding through them. The dialogue at the close attains a brevity which conveys the sense of profound emotion. But the masterly rewriting for this is what it amounts to in the free current has stolen the life out of the earlier play, which can now stand simple. Mahalanobis, a historical personage. Growing symbolism Nei. Raj/Asja. As a milestone in the poet's progress. It may be added that the title Atonement is taken from what is really only a subplot. In 1910 appeared Raji I the King, translated as the King of the Dark Chamber. It has both gained and lost in translation. The gain is by the partial omission of bands of strolling singers who clutter up the action with an aimless, almost imbecile revelry which becomes a convention in the poet's later dramas. Also, the scenes are freely rearranged, with a great access of compactness. The play, which is very difficult to present, has been staged in Bengal with fair success. It has been played in Germany and, in L22, in Paris. Its comparative failure on the stage is due to the fault which flaws it as literature. Its theme is somberly impressive, a magnificent attempt to dramatize the secret dealings of God with the human heart. But for such a theme the most watchful economy is needed. The poet cannot afford the litty suggestion of the whimsical or the trivial. Had Rabindranath cut away all the teasing irrelevancies, he would have low-t nothing of sublimity, and his work would have cut a straight way to greatness. As it is, Thakur with much assistance, able though superfluous spoils everything. The Bengali stage was crowded with conventions that have no counterpart in life. One wearied of the female sannyasi who shows such insight and wisdom, wearied of the incessant and unprovoked five-inging. In Rabindranath, one escapes the SA11 Nyasi 11I. But that is Neil gain, for he had his own conventions, and let them settle woodenly upon his genius. Among them I do not include the constant singing. For when a man has an inexhaustible gift of pure song he must be thanked and not merely forgiven for using it, even though dramatic reality be lost by it. Raji I is crammed with songs, only a few of which appear in the English translation. The Finti too with their rapt exaltation build up the atmosphere of awe which the play requires. But grandfather is just a nuisance. He and his following of hilarious have-nothings act as a regular chorus, and he introduces every new action 14210 Rabindranath Tagore of the play. They form the bridge between Autumn Festival and Fyafguni, that darling work of the poet's later years. Wisdom is justified of her children. Athens, criticized for convention and for producing an unreal drama, is now SN to have made drama perform certain functions with a minimum of col1 \inch. Bradley has pointed out how Shakespeare not only had his fools, whose supposed irresponsibility /e him a means of self-expression, but had a way of putting more of himself and of his views into one character than into others, so that this character served as his mouthpiece, or, on occasion, as the ideal spectator whose representation was uncolon, of the functions of the Attic chorus. Ibsen came, forbidding the soliloquy, which went the W1I of the chorus. But our modern playwrights have not got rid of convention, or of the undramatic, and the chorus has a way of reappearing. Thomas Hardy has his choirs of aerial fantasies, Mr. Misaffield has his gaffer, one a somber brother of Thakur Rabindranath developed his own con \inchins, some of them, such as Thakur strangely like those of Western playwrights. He has his madmen, even if grandfather is not to be given place among them. Later, he is to have Ball, the blind bard. But his madmen are not five officiantly mad poets. Madmen never are. They are subtle sticks. Raji I shows his symbol I am full grown. No longer can it be escaped. As is usual with him, he had long had the germ thought of the play with him. Its English title is a phrase occurring in Ke. Raji I suffers from his lack of a ruthless technique. Compression, the ion of extraneous make-believe, this is what it needs. The allegory itself brings in much of the make-believe. It goes into detail, remorselessly, refusing the reader a single normal moment. Goes so into detail that sometimes it has almost the effect of sarcasm, as in the Queen's apology for giving the singers her jewels, dear boys of the hermitage. How shall I, you? This necklace is but made of jewels, hard stones, its hardness will give you pain, I have nothing like the garlands of flowers you have on. In Nan. Growing Symbolism, New Dramas 211. There are moments of noble poetry lighting up Raji I, sown like stars through its mist of symbolism. There is the dark king's speech to the queen, utterly out of keeping with the character of the speaker, yet so lovely in itself, the darkness of the infinite heavens, whirled into life and being by the power of my love, has drawn the light of a myriad stars into itself, and incarnated itself in a form of flesh and blood. And in that form, what cons of thought and striving, untold yearnings of limitless skies, the countless gifts of unnumbered seasons. There is the rhetoric of the Queen's lament, why do the torches of morning not flare up for me all over the world? Why does not the earth quake and tremble? Is my fall but the unobserved dropping of the puny bean flower? Is it not more like the fall one of a glowing star whose fiery blazon bursts the heavens asunder? It is wonderful that a foreigner should handle our difficult tongue as iri. That last sentence, one of the many lines of blank verse embedded in his translations, a flash of Elizabethan rhetoric, whose fiery blazon bursts the heavens asunder. Lastly, the fourth act reaches intensity and drama, with the Queen's sense of humiliation. The play contains more than his usual side glances, flashes of sarcasm or polemic. It began what is now a regular feature of his plays, their political innuendo. Which in T/Ze Freaker MT is so obvious that in foreign countries it was erroneously supposed to be just an attack on the British government in India. Raji I shows with striking intensity what may be called his republicanism. We are often told that republicanism is not a doctrine which grows naturally on Indian soil, yet Rabindranath is reported to have told a Western interviewer that he believed India would become a republic. We have seen that he often stands apart from the main currents of Indian feeling. And it is characteristic of his keen intellectuality that he should be won by the appeal to his mind when tradition might have drawn him otherwhere. His plays have plenty of kings. But they are usually abdicating, or wanting to abdicate, or in the end 212 Rabindranath Tagore learned to abdicate, that is, the true kings, the kinglets often being rascals, mere foils for their overlord's virtues. He king in Raji I refuses to exercise any of the ordinary prerogatives of kingship, to punish treason or resent insult. Raji I was found obscure by his own countrymen. This may be in part the fault of what I have called his elvish plots, and his capricious freaks of construction. Neither Kangchi nor the Queen, as presented, is explicable. He leaves out far too much of the working, which neither dramatist nor examinee can do. All through the King of the Dark Chamber may be felt the pulsing of a great idea, the dramatization of the truth that the service of God demands all one and has. Yet the idea gleams more faintly than need be through the mist of allegory and the thickets of verbiage, the irrational and irrelevant jubilation of grandfather, and the preachments of that annoying person, Surngama. The symbolism of Raji I is carried a stage further in the next play, The Post Office, where we have it very gently and touchingly expressed. The play has been translated by other hands than the poet's, and is therefore one of his few works that are truthfully represented in the English text. Written in prose throughout, without even a song, its texture is filmy and of the very tough of dreams. It was an emphatic our right of the author. Its popularity in Germany gave him a special pleasure, and it succeeded in London ABO. It is very elucti /e on the stage, he told me. It acted in Berlin. I heard it recited by a great French actor, and it is to be staged in Paris. He rejected the notion that Thcle later dramas, all of which were done for his boys at Santiniketan, were what you call allegorical. I am very fond of them, and to me they are just like other plays. To me, they are very concrete. 11T1, fondness grew, with that turning back to his boyhood which was characteristic of these later years of his. Amal, he said, was his own youth. Further, the post office was an E5 Peschel favorite, not songs were introduced into it in 1918. Conversation. Growing symbolism new dramas 213 only with the author, but with all those whom, in default of any other word, I must call Tagorites. I have spoken of its popularity in Berlin and Paris. Mr. Yeats has borne testimony to its effectiveness with certain English and Irish schools ill-thought. On the stage the little play shows that it is very perfectly constructed, and conveys to the right audience an emotion of gentleness and peace. This I believe to be true, and I think I understand why it has such a deep place in the love of the poet's Indian readers also. Yet I think they overrate it, and that its rank will fall as time goes on. Saying this, I frankly admit that it is literature of a kind that makes small appeal to me, though I believe I can see its merits, in an objective and entirely intellectual fashion. I think its great vogue among his Indian followers, at any rate, was partly due to accidents, not least to the fact that the poet himself took the part of Thakurdala superbly and unforgettably. When Rabindranath acted, he laid a spell upon his audience, which lasted while memory lived. Having disqualified myself by this confession of inability to place myself in this instance among good Tagorites, I must bid why indicate what seem to me the qualities and faults of the play. The poet builds upon a substructure of sentimentalism. Tears lay very close to the surface of his imaginative countrymen, and with them a pathetic situation was half the battle. But Aristophanes was right when he denounced Euripides, that great poet sometimes harrowed audiences by the methods of the street beggar who borrows a sick child. The clamour of the children of dying Alcestis was no doubt as popular with whatever the Athenians had that took the place of our school prize givings, as Shakespeare's Arthur pleading with Hubert has been in our day. In the post office only the poet's skill has avoided catastrophe. If the language had been a shade less perfect in simplicity and naturalness, the play would have sagged downward, into a hopeless mush and welter of sentimentalism. 1 Preface to the Post Office. 214 Rabindranath Tagore. Other flaws are I must think Rabindranath's Thakurdada, whose appearance many readers must come to dread, though they know him to be inevitable when the poet gets onto certain oods. The justification is, of course, that the Charlters, of these later plays have all moved away from the full-blooded life of drama, into folklore and the conventional life of allegory and miracle play. That would be vindication, if we had not had Thakurdada so often and if the poet kept him in his place, but this he never does, weighting him with a significance that he cannot bear, without being put out of proportion with his world. A kindred fault is, Rabindranath's introduction of what many will call fads of his own. A play of such appealing straightforwardness and simplicity cannot afford to contain anything so explosive as satire. We know that Rabindranath dislikes pundits and all sorts of officials, and the pretentious are bound to be made foolish when he handles them, as the doctor and headman are here. But this reminder of the poet's strong prejudices vexes the reader. Lastly, the ending of the play is melodrama, after all that truthfulness. We tire of these mysterious kings, who always come at midnight. Yes, they are allegorical and they are deeply significant, but that is the more reason why they should have appeared once in his work, and once only. Yet the post office is a moving piece of work. It is full of feeling, and the handling is delicate. The language is of an unsurpassable naturalness, the speech of the streets purged of all its grossness yet robbed of not one drop of raciness. The dialogue flows in even unhurried stream. We understand and sympathize, as everyone falls in love with Amal. The talk is such as every Indian village knows, the characters walk every Indian bazaar. The play's pathos and easy simplicity will survive even that incongruous king at the end, the king who is apparently an Eastern Rajii. If so, he is not altogether out of place, as a king is yet has a brand new red post office of the British government. Who does not come himself yet is, represented, with or without his knowledge, by his unexpected and unnecessary officials. I have given my reasons for thinking that the poet's admirers claim too much for the play. But it is growing symbolism. New dramas 215 touching, of one texture of simplicity throughout, and within its lime I1s an almost perfect piece of art. It docks successfully what both Shakespeare and Kalidasa failed to do, brings onto the Jadija child who neither shows off nor is silly. Symbolism and sarcasm reappear in Akaliya Yatan, the castle of conservatism. The institution of fixed deef is the translation the poet suggested to me, which is nearer to the literal meaning, immovable house. The Sathi is obvious and contemptuous, and the play is an elaborate mockery of extreme orthodoxy. As a drama, it is just a long drawn-out frolic, its seriousness of meaning alone making it more than pleasant, and often delightful, foolery. This seriousness / as promptly recognized by the inmates of Hinduism's Akalayatan, who saw themselves depicted as the residents of a vast lunatic asylum. The poet softened the blow by replying to his critics that he criticized only Hindu social customs. But his critics had the wit to see that, if everything that a Hindu docks is religion, as we used to be told, it came to the same thing. It made a great row, he observed to me. The play's teaching reflects many schools of religious thought. It obviously owes something to Christianity, perhaps more than any other book of his. It owes much to such modern Hindu movements as that of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, which inculcate the oneness of all religions. Its fable Wu3 probably suggested by the princess, and, more remotely, the castle of Indolence and the fairy queen. It contains a great deal of airy jolly mockery and parody, much serious comment on life and religion, and some exquisite songs. Punchak, a chief character, is a very pleasant fellow. It appeared in Prayasi, in 1911. The Pjsto Dotfas and Gitanjali belong to the same period, the lyrics in the latter book are dated between 1907 and 1910. The poet's own comments on the two books may be taken together. I was very restless, just as I am now. That gave me the idea of a child pining for freedom, and the world anxious to keep it in its bounds, for it has its duties there, and that sort of thing. I was 216 Rabindranath Tagore anxious to know the world. At that time, I thought that it was in the West that the spirit of humanity was experimenting and woking. My restlessness became intolerable. I wrote Dakar in 3 or 4 days. Of 1.1 the SANE time, I wrote Gitanjali. Most of the pieces were written at Santiniketan. I used to write almost 1 per day, and some hours in the night. I did not intend to publish them. I knew people would be disappointed. And would I that after so 11 ilritari they / very poor. But I knew they were very intimately my own. Those who lived at Santiniketan remembered the period, and the poet's wandering form in the moonlit mango groves. He slept very little, often for only 3 or 4 hours, he roe about 4 o'clock, and usually d at 10. Moonlight called him abroad always. And when moonlight insid d with a phase of lyrical seasightement, he would become bcidc himself, in a veritable ecstasy, and pcnd high. Nights drifting among the trees. The Gitanjali songs have become world famous, and they form a large put of the English book of T1 aim. T. Book has had a rebirth into our Western tongue, that a considerate literature has gathered round it. This render, it upperfew for me to do more than indicate, in a very fountains, 3 or 4 characteristics of these songs. It would be churlish to find the collection mono onu. Nevertheless, the eager delight with which one enters gentle paradise flags at Inknalls, before one gets to the end of its 159 poems. that delights experiences constant renewal. Of the frehcst, most joyous sort. But the best flfty of these songs are outstanding in their beauty and appeal, and make a far richer book than the whole. I say this, weary of eyeing it. Gitanjali brings the poet into closer and more familiar contact with the natural world than any previous book. T is R.O. T to say that IB natural effects are truer or brighter or lovelier than many that have been attained by him before. It is a matter of atmosphere, of being steeped in sound and light and color. The book's mood is grey, its key is almost always minor, its pictures mournful. Or, at Beatty, untouched the post office. The Golden Boat. Conversation. Growing Symbolism New Dramas 217, by Exhilaration. Probably the impression of monotony comes from this oneness of mood, an impression as of a wind wailing through rainy woods, and from the fact that the book gets its effects out of the merest handful of illustrations. Rarely was fine poetry, one thinks, made out of less variety. Rain and cloud, wind and rising river, boatmen, lamps, temples and gongs, flutes and vineyas, birds flying home at dusk, travelers tired or with provisions exhausted, flowers opening and falling. It is astonishing what range the poet gets out of these few things. They are far too naturally and purely used here to be CA 11 ed properties, as they justifiably might be in much of his work. W.B. Yeats speaks of these songs as being as much the growth of the common soil as the grass and rushes. One they are. Almost every line of Gitanjali is crammed with natural things. Yet Rabindranath was not a close observer of the smaller differences, as many Engelbite poets have been. To him a bird was a bird, with a possible variation between half a dozen species, a flower was a flower, a leaf was a leaf. I can well believe that to him any perception of difference between bird, or flower, and flower, I am not denying that he knows a hawk from a handsaw, or a rose from a me/ati bluxom would almost like quibbling. But we must remember that the detailed knowledge of nature that marks our English poets today a recent thing. The Elizabethans managed to get all the freshness of wind and grove out of a limited knowledge. The collar gypsy and thyr ushered in an NGE in which poets, however deficient of one wise, have generally known their countryside. I believe the enrichment of English poetry has been very great, and that the outlines of a most exquisite loveliness have been brought to sight, after long blurring. But we must not forget that A Midsummer Night's Dream was written a quarter of a millennium before Thyrsis, and much dew-drenched poetry besides. Similarly Rabindranath, with birds that are birds and flowers that are flowers, has written, in Gitanjali, a book whose every poem conveys the impression l'introduction to Gitanjali. 218 RFB/Endranity TLGORE of having been composed in the open air, or before open windows. The general outlines of the woods and the flitting passage of birds, deep in their unknown day's employ, are present all the time, and wind and bee and bird rustle, and eel. Once, at least. This steeping of his spirit in the world wells out into an exuberant gladness. Let all the strains of joy mingle in my last song, the joy that makes the earth flow /cr in the riotous CXCES of the grass, the joy that sets the twin brothers, life and death, dancing over the wide world, the joy that sweeps in with the tempest, shaking and waking all life with laughter, joy that sits still with its tears on the open red lotus of pain, and the joy that throws everything it has upon the dust, and no /s not a word. The poet felt that these poems were very intimately my own. Mingled with perfect revivals of characteristics already found in Nafridiot or earlier books, his ethical earnestness, his scorn of sham, most of all of sham discovered within his own soul, his utter dependence upon God are regrets and thankfulness which saints have doubtless felt before but not often expressed, as when he blesses his Lord for the forbearance with which he refrains from coming into his days. 11. It was through the Ingli-H Gitanjali that I got my first introduction to his poetry, and I confess myself to this day so under its spell that I cannot appraise it with any degree of accuracy. The book has spoken to countless hearts, has been a revelation of what they felt and experienced, and cannot ever be forgotten. As the narration 5 pa 5, travelers will hum them and the highway and men rowie 1g upon river. Lovers, while they await one another, hall find, in murmuring them, this love of God a magic eye, ulf wherein one hc one our own more but our pa 5 Zion may bathe and renew its youth. At every moment the heart of poet flows out ard to tlesc without derogation or kunda 5 sensation, for one ha 5 known that they will understand, and it has filled itself with the circumstance of their jives. It brings us very close to a religious experience which is universal, yet intensely individual, an experience which is one with the writer's life, no alien dress but the natural growth one, E.J. Gitanjali, 58. Ibid, 32. W. B. Yeats, Introduction to Gita 11 Jolly. Growing Symbolese Janu Dramas 219 of his days his poems have led him to God, one his sorrows and failures have shown him God. His restlessness, of which his words speak, in my quotation from his talk, is in the book, Evening the Minor Tone. His anxiety to mix with the simple life of men, wherever he can find it at its fullest, is also yen here. I stand not where thou earnest down and owest thyself as mine, there to clasp thee to my heart and take thee as my comrade. Thou art the brother amongst my brothers, but I heed them not, I divide not my earnings with them, thus sharing my all with thee. In pleasure and in pain I stand not by the side of men, and thus stand by thee. I shrink to give up my life, and thus do not plunge into the great waters of life. See, no less present is his watchful fear of being absorbed in this outward world, so that he forgets the world's Lord. Oh, grant me my prayer that I may never lose the bliss of the touch of the one in the play of the many. The imagery and thought of Gitanjali are more Indian than in any previous book. An untranslated poem even celebrates Hari, for many of the pieces, of course, remember Radha. He makes magnificent use of what is the most appealing thing in that story, love's search through the tempest. I can see nothing before me. I wonder where comes thy chariot. By what dim shore of the ink-black river, by what far edge of the frowning forest, through what mazy depths of gloom art thou threading thy course to come to me, my friend, 0. He had used this legend often before, but in such a way as to make it seem that it was for its pictorial quality. Now he cut to its heart, and enabled at least one Christian reader to understand how such a story could rouse religious enthusiasm. Lastly, the metrical achievement of Gitanjali is impeccable. The poems were written to be sung, but they sing themselves. 1. E. Gitanjali, 101. Ibid, 77. Ibid, 63. Krishna. I have substituted the chariot of the Bengali for the English version's path. E. Gita 11 Jolly, 23. 18. The second emergence, into world, reputation Gitanjali coincided with a long period of harvest, chiefly in Kaniksho, one with his educational activities. He was issuing the SII 11 TI 11 ICTA 11 addresses and writing his reminiscences. As he used much of the substance of Bispro's religious and ethical writings as the material of his addresses and lectures in the /vest, the interested reader will be familiar with their Carol critiques. The present study, overcharged already with the barest crud 111y of his, erst and diamas, must lcve them on one sitk. They are cautifully written, and his glancing mobile thou, ht and intuition, see found in tlm itel tiv experk-ion. In L9io hirana changed. As he might have put it him clf the lean-umans of the world's flute sounded in lw ear and pierced hb eclu-ion. He grew sated with retirement, 1:1 DEA and ER for one of those periods of traffic ith the marketplace that proved so RCFRC hing to his pint. IHERCFCRR. D to his appearance 111 Calcutta, and intense work for some months, 111 The CJ to 11 feet the Parayan CLLN null /E body of the Brahmo Samaj into the full dash dot. RC 1111 of national and democratic activity. After that F11 lure he lut. R turned to Santiniketan. Again, after more than a car of Abklasi Ekluion, his old re-TLENCS returned, stronger than ever. Fortunately, it came at the same time as WCH, a call from the outer world as few poets have had. Dramatic was this emergence and to a wonderful and far-voyaging journey, though the call, when it came almost a delay. It came from his own people. Rabindranath, burning to travel to the west and plunge into that fuller life of which he thought it held the secret, was delayed by the Sahitya Parishad, the Bengal Literary Academy. To celebrate his jubilee, his countrymen gave 220 emergence, into world reputation 220 won him an unparalleled ovation. The experience must have been moving in the extreme, to a poet so deeply patriotic. For the time, all misunderstanding was swept away and educated Bengal joined in recognition. On January 28, 1912, Calcutta 2 Town Hall was packed with a wildly enthusiastic audience, which every branch of activity was fully represented. The experience proved too much for him. He had been in intense pain for a long time, physical suffering having succeeded to his protracted mental distress, and for the next 2 years it seemed as if he must soon die. One thing that drove him to the West was the hope of recovering health. C.F. Andrews told me how WA5 Ted he looked. In fact, I can't believe that robust Fatlau is the same person. I always have a picture of him as he looked then in London, wretched and broken. On his return from England, after the visit which made him famous, he was persuaded to undergo an operation. An English specialist took the case, and handled it with a patience and kindness that the poet never forgot. Had operating not taken place, Andrews said, Rabindranath could not have lived out the year. He was saved, and never suffered again in the same way. Illness followed his ovation in the town hall, prostrating him on the very morning when he should have sailed for England. His doctor forbade him to move, and enjoined a month's absolute rest. So I went to Shailyada, and simply to wale time I translated those giddy 111 jolly songs. For they were very dear to me, and I wanted to have the pleasure of going over them on time. I felt sure my translations were only schoolboy exercises. So I showed them to Ajit, who said they were quite good. Also, on the steamer I went on translating, which gave me great pleasure. I reached London, and stayed in a hotel. Here L suffered great disappointment. Everyone seemed like phantoms. The hotel used to empty after breakfast, and L watched the crowded streets. I was in despair, and thought of coming back. It was not possible to know this humanity, or enter into the heart of another place. Then it occurred to me to try to get Iodo touch with Rothenstein. I had met him at Rabindranath's place, but no one had told him I was a poet. He just knew me as Rabindranath Tagore, one of the Tagore family. So L looked up his telephone number, and rang him up, and he came at once, and got me better low one jengs. You know that Vale of Health, in Hampstead, absurd name. Well, he got me a house there. He was my neighbor, and came often to see me. Then, one day he said he had heard R was a poet. Could T give him any idea of my work? I told him I had some prose translations, but knew the English was not good. However, he took them. After a day or two, he came back quite excited, and said they were the most wonderful things he had ever seen. I thought he was an artist and didn't understand literature. He saw from my face that I did NTBCL1N, H1111. He had copies typed, and sent them to Yeats, Stopford Brooke, and Bradley. Bradley replied that he had never expected to find a real poet. The other two were very excited, too. So Rothenstein GA /L. A reading at his Ho 5e a cat read to a group of people. /11s May Sinclair and Nevinson were there. That was where I met Andrews. I had not met him before. 1e Yeats read some very short poems, while I was miserable. How could these make anyone press 10n? I asked. They would glide over their minds. You know, your people arc not ll. Monstrative, and they made no sign. I was quite angry // 1th Yeats for doing me this injustice. Next day letters came from /F1SS Sinclair and other people. I was startled by their tone. But gradually I saw they were quite sincere. The best of all his own translations, the Anbite Gitanjali, is a haunted book. He had spent so much time with these Ursian in India and on his voyage to England, that the book was entirely a new one. His personality had passed into it. Despite its name, it contained translations, not only from the Bengali Gitanjali but from a number of other works. After a visit to America, following his English stay, he returned to India, in the early autumn of 1913. The tide of fame was still running strongly, and had not attained its height. At the landing stage in Bombay, he found a crowd waiting with garland, he thought, for some official, but it was for him. He was mobbed with praise as he fled across India. On the evening of a day in the first week of November, when I was staying at Santiniketan, suddenly a hubbub arose, and the masters rushed up with a sheaf of telegrams. We have great news. Mr. Tagore has won the Nobel Prize. A minute later he entered. It was a time of great happiness for us all. The one conversation. Emergence, into world reputation. 223 boys did not know what the Nobel Prize was, but they understood that their Gurudev won. Had done something wonderful, as he was always doing. They formed ranks and marched round the R1 shram, Ing, Amy Ider Santiniketan. 2. They would not go by the guest house a second time, but gathered at the Dakar till the poet went to it. He was greeted with a frenzy of war, one after another throwing himself down and touching his feet. He, elud with hands to his face, palms together, deprecating their homage, and, when Ajit Chakravarti flung himself down, he tried to stop him. Everyone shouted and sang. At the boys dispersed and made a huge bonfire. Rabindranath told me the award was not altogether a surprise when in England, he had been asked to send copies of his books and press cuttings to the Nobel Prize Committee. Now his success depressed him. I shall never get any peace again. I shall be worried with appeals, all kinds of people will be writing to me. My heart sank when I saw those people at Bombay and realized that they were going to make a public show of me there. He withdrew into himself, and turned again to Unting songs, published since in 2 books. The first of these, Gitama I/Yasongar, A11D, though published in 1920, was written between 1908 and 1914, some of the best pieces being written during the English sojourn, or when returning upon the high seas. This is perhaps his greatest book of songs. The criticisms I have passed 011 the others apply to this also, but in smaller measure. The book is one of his most joyful, full of songs of service, of trust in God, of thankfulness for the beauty of the world. O flow thou to shayest me with dawn, swiftly, laughingly withdrawn. Came what messenger of late, pushing past sleep's closed gale? Waking to the surge, I find that my eyes with tears are blind. Teacher God. Our Santiniketan, the school song. 224 Rabindranath Tagore. Then as if the blue sky had whi paired heavenly thing. 5, every leaping limb is glad, till my body sings. Now my heart her dew-drenched eyes lifts like buds of sacrifice, onward to her boundal 5's rest runs my life, with brimming breast. The songs are full of retrospect, of weighing of life. Once my life, in pomp of spring, flow / cred within her myriad ring. 100-petaled bloom, she threw largess of a leaf or I / oh, having handfuls left to fling. Now a fruit, she strews no more petals on the orchard floor. Now her days arc at their fall, now she give her elf, her all, waited // her juicy store no. 2 ha 5 a charming Remini sense of folk st0 re, which I, shows us that his old d1ys, though finished, aic not so far a to be out of hail, to our psiral iskers / ool today, tmxuts, let's make our / I, and 111 shade of the Chilmpilbrothgrispow 5 gather together. Another, 40, makes superb theft of the opening of the most haunting of all earlier Bengali lyrics, Rarn Prasad's This Day Will Surely Pass, Mother, This Day Will Pa / Rabindranath keeps the refrain, I know this day will pass that one day, someday, the dim sun with tender smiling W12 look in my face his last farewell. Er. Crossing, 38. Cf. Fruit Gathering, 2. Emergence, into World Reputation 225, beside the way the flute will sound, the herds will graze on the river bank, the children will play in the courtyards, the birds will sing on. Yet this day will pass, this day will pass. This is my prayer to thee, that ere I go I may learn why the green earth, lifting her eyes to the sky, called me to her, why the silence of the night told me of the stars, why the day's glory raised waves in my soul. This is my prayer to thee. When earth's revolutions for me are ended, in the finishing of my song let me pause a moment, that I may fill my basket with the flowers and fruits of the 6 seasons. That in the light of this life I may see thee in going, that I may garland thee in going with the garland from my own throat when earth's revolutions for me are ended. His work contains nothing more perfect in tenderness, his own beautiful English version one has made it known the world over. 103 makes use of everyday imagery, yonder are thy herds of sun and stars, thy cows of light, there thou dost sit, playing thy flute, pasturing them in the vast sky. 86 seems to remember Christ's solemn warning to his followers to watch, lest coming suddenly he take them unawares, Fruit Gathering, S.I. 15226 Rabindranath Tagore They have all gone to the woods in this moonlit night. In the wind that is drunken with spring's delight. But I will not go, I will stay in the house, and so wait in my lonely corner this night I will not go in this wind that is drunk with delight. Rather, tea room with care I must scour and cleanse and prepare, for if he remembers me, then he will come, though I know not when. They must wake me swiftly. I will not fare out where the drunk wind reels through the air. There re many fine poems of wind and wave, some of them translated in Crossing. There are many subtle and low /ely allegories, such as 66. 199-ah, a passionate paean of praise for the body. 34-3 is nobly ethical. Some of the finest of the English Gita 11 Jolly are from Gita Mailya. 23 is the famous first poem of the Ingli 5H book, 26 is the hardly less famous and equally fine Song of Farewell, in the same book. And such poems as 25 and 27 and there are many of them give us his mysticism at its best, with a fresh breeze beating through it, and the light of the open sky falling about it. He wanders after God's chariot, in the trck of sun and moon. 29-5 makes the old splendid use of natural process. 30 is the famous and grand poem which is 53 in the English Gitanjali. He cultivated this sterner side of his genius too little. The last poem of Gitamai/Ya epitomizes the book's message and attitude, in my evenings thou hast come, in beautiful riment, I salute thee. In the heart of my darkness thou hast low and head, I salute thee. In this Tao and alt, still, deep, placid sky I salute thee. In this gentle, peaceful, sleepy wind I same thee. Fruit Gathering, 10. Ibid, 72, a part paraphrase. Ibid, 2. E. Gita 11J11 Li, 93. Ibid, 68. Emergence, into World Reputation 227 On the grassy couch of this tired earth I salute thee. In this silent incantation of the steadfast stars I salute thee. In this lonely rest house, at work's end, I salute thee. In the flowery garland of this fragrant evening sky I salute thee. Gitali Songs, the second book, is a much less valuable assemblage. It contains 108 pieces, the number of beads on a Vaishnava rosary, and the artificial character suggested by this exact number is borne out by the details of the collection. The poems were written for music, and the words are of very subordinate importance. They have his lyric grace and lightness, but their content is nothing. Since the poetry is the slave of music, the pieces appear on the printed page like the elaborate conceits in form of the Caroline lyrists, who wrote poems in the shape of crosses and altars. The tune has dictated the shape. Large sections, poems all of 10 or of 12 lines, variously divided into stanzas, make it seem as if the poet were trying to naturalize French forms, and to give us a rosary of rondos. I have his word that this resemblance is accidental. But there is real resemblance of character, as well as of form. The resemblance of form may be seen from his own description. First, there is the refrain, then the amplification of it, then the refrain is repeated, and the amplification also, but the latter is modified. Most of the pieces are made cf the old stuff which he kept so plentifully on hand. Long before the rosary is counted, we weary most utterly of storms and boats, helmsmen and travelers, flowers and flutes and lamps. He has no book which has so large a proportion of pieces worthless as poetry, and his technical skill is wasted. There are good things, of course. Number 13 is a rains piece, Chatged with F. Selmg, Dino Qa. Nko a senior and bulk v oin skies with mill, 2 and unic. I conversa lion. 228 Rabindranath Tagore lost our stars, and lost the sun, lost. The ways in darkness run, waves are on the river swelling. Earth and sky are all filled with the rain's call. Pours to earth the rain, for me. 2. Dark night is knelling, sounding through every vein. 20 is a famous song, admirable in directness and strength. In his one hand are pearls, a sword is in his other, he that now thy door has broken. He came not beg, but out of strife and conquest to bear away thy soul, he that now thy door has broken. Along the road of death, into thy life he came, he that now thy door has broken. Never will he go with half. Of all thou art he will be a Balasi soul Lord, he that now thy door has broken. 26 is a lovely autumn song, your dear hands with your red radiance filling, autumn, you went, that ROY beauty spilling. And with your dewy trace, and tumbled robes that toss on the woodland way, autumn, dawn's heart is wildly troubled today. 82 begins a group of deeper feeling and thought. He refuses to turn away pain, for by it he has found God. 87 contains a profound touch. The mother is unknown to her child yet proves its chief good when born, so will death prove to us. Emergence, into world reputation 229-92 emphasizes that their way is known to the birds and the seasons, man alone has to ask, in the bird's wings lies hidden the knowledge of their way, the stars cloak with their flames their destination. In their 6 painted chariots the 6 seasons come and go, uncharted, I alone ask tidings of my unknown way. 106 is an ecstatic song of greeting to the new life. 107 is an elaborate poem, in his more architectural manner, with well-handled ansas. It opens, evening has taken into her dark basket the lotus of Shut-I-Ite. When she reaches the shore of new dawn, the soft lotus of itself will open. I am a pilgrim on that road to the Mount of Rising, I am walking alone in evening's wake, while day's end falls on my horizon. 108 is a stately sonnet of farewell. Gitali, like so much of his work, must be judged simply as word music. Nevertheless, when so much work of one kind comes from the same poet, it suffers. How CCR perfect. I conclude with a few detached passages. Night opens her red eyes in the blowing light of the terrible God. No 10. There's a trembling in the wind. A fear on the ripe rice, it shakes in the full fields. 16 L111 ES that might be by Yeats. Delay no more, no more. Out flaps the light. Lo, at my door the listening night. 17, the flood rushes in from the sea of the full moon L tugs at my life. 21, 230 Rabindranath Tagore with heart which fears ere whelm you watch the black clouds of the storm. Look to your pilot's form. Lo! How he laughs beside the helm. Jo! On the sky's rim disaster rises, with laughter on laughter. Destruction riots in my hair and in my dress. 33, see where evening flings away her ornaments of gold. With starflowers crams her hands instead while through the sky her locks are spread and with her worship fills the darkness. Gently she lays her tiredness down in the nests of sleeping birds, her rosary in the wood's deep shade, of burning firefly jewels made, hides in her breast, and counts, and counts. 61, but age quickly showed that his mind had been resting only, and was not by any means exhausted. Biography, his greatest book of lyrics, was written between 1914 and 1916, at the height of his worldwide recognition. Its title A Flight of Cranes, is symbolical, for migratory birds have always stood for the soul in its passage through these phenomenal skies to eternity. The title has a special fitness, for these lyrics are pilgrim songs, eagerly looking beyond this plane of time and sense to other lives, whether reincarnate here or placed beyond our sun and stars. The poet is over 50 years of age, and to him ha come the same experience as to Dryden when over Eventi, when thoughts crowded so thick and fast upon him that his only care was whether to versify them or to run them into the other harmony of prose. His favorite imagery is of a river. In this there is not 111 G new, but the river is now not always, or even usually, one which flows through these lands of his sojourn. Often it is an aerial river, the magnificent streaming of that space flood on whose eddies the stars are floating lilies. In these lyrics his intellectual greatness is revealed. His mind is like a spring emergence, into world reputation 231 from whose depths thoughts and similes bubble incessantly. Though effervescence of ideas is never checked for a moment, and especially notable is the flow of abstract ideas. The life of one ras and blossom is as dear as ever, and even more delightfully handled, but the poet is not the slave of his fank a sterner or, at any rate, a stronger mood being in possession of his fleeting moments. The lateness of many of his developments is very noteworthy. From one point of view the most precocious of poets, already voluminous while in his teens, from another he is the most slow and orderly in development. That is why a selection from the work of all his periods would show him as a greater poet than he seems either in the pitiless completeness of his Bengali text or the haphazard mutilation of his English one. In Biography, not only has the more abstract side of his mind found expression at last, but in diction he has struck a balance, after his experiments, between the colloquial tongue and the rich Sanskrit vocabulary. This balance is as perfect as can be, a marriage of poise and dignity, of lissamise and power. The critics have Rabindranath's gracious permission, as once Tennyson's, to blaspheme. Let them rave. As for this undignified Shalata Pi 1. Jet the Sufi flout. Of this base metal shall be filed a key that shall unlock the door he howls without. In the opening poem, an invocation from the old poet to the spirit of youth, to the new age, iconoclastic and rebellious, diction and thought are rollicking. The old are grey parrots, screening their foolish heads under their wings, the young flirt disrespectful to a delighted poet's encouragement. The form of Biography is extraordinarily free. He can do what he like with meter and rhythm. And he no longer cares for any rules except those that justify themselves by resultant beauty or force. Sometimes his meters stream and scatter one literally, walking language. 232 Rabindranath Tagore over the page, like fountains making their way down a Himalayan height. There is practically nothing second Tate. The least important group of lyrics are altogether joy-bringing. There is the song of untimely spring, of the impet one us, flowers that, pushing before all with shrill, high laughter, blossomed and fell in heaps. 1 These, in love with death, 0 crazy ones, 0 heedless of cost reckoning. Drunk with the sound of his footsteps from afar, you spread your deaths over the dust of his path for that guest. Neither seeing nor hearing, you burst your bonds, you would not double you wanted for vision of your eyes. Then there is the dancing lyric 11 which contrasts the two goddesses of his imagination, upperbly sung by him. O often. Here is great praise of autumn, personified as Lakshmi. Scene 111 The fullness of the fruitful gold beautiful peace of the dewy season. Hardly less I the praise of Urvasi, she who with both hands scatters the delirium of spring, in blood-red pallias flowers and roses, and in the song of leaping youth. Another group of poem mirror his religious experience. These are deeper than those of Gita 11 Jolly. Their flights are wider and more sustained. His human love, ever since the first fine careless rapture of the pre-Me 11 ACI period was finished, showed increasingly a tendency to merge into the divine love. Now we have reached a third stage, in which the human love is ne/er more than a starting point, from which the divine love takes off. Thursday, in the Boatman 3 lyric we know that the angular figure who ventures out in such a storm with only the burden of a white rose is a imbal. It one of his fine Padma storm, finer than ever, but these earthly waters will now carry to the end unearthly voyagers and the flicker of go tly 5 ales. J/11 His sublimity of imagery crowds the great Orzum 4 poem. His exhilaration rises, at this prospect of life upon life, all creation, rushing to apparent extinction. Cf. Lover's Gift, 52. Ibid, 54. Ibid, 84. Fruit Gathering, 41. Emergence, into world reputation 233 In their hundreds they rush to death, like the stars in their myriads to the hit of dawn. The blood of heroes, the tears of Mohurs, will all this worth be lost in the dust of the earth? Will not heaven be bought with it? It is true that he spoils this passage, with its superb rhetoric and its flashing imagination, by adding the question, will not the treasurer of the universe repay so vast a debt? But, if he resembles Wordsworth in such prosy interjections amid sublimest beauties, he resembles him also in the way his peaks of lofty thought are tinted with the sunrise of imagination. In these poems winds from worlds not quickened by the sun one cast their shadows on verse whose serenity they fail to ruffle. The Oarsman poem was written in mid-throe of the Great War, in 1916. To his horror-struck gaze an evil age was breaking up amid anguish ineffable. He hated the arrogance of the strong. Yet it is characteristic of him that in this poem he insists that the cowardice of the weak and the rancor of the destitute are equally culpable. He has never been one to console the shrinking and feeble-willed, by casting all blame upon the vigorous and bold. The profound peace of these poems is thing imaginable. Even in those which are the central core of rest remains untroubled. Glimpses which have come to him here, the most healing songs of battle, he speaks of the He to whom I shall sing that song on the banks of new light is with me all day, encircling my earth. In the Sioux/I groves of autumn he walks, veiled with the fragrance of flowers. Fa/gun he puts on my head his garland of wooing. In a twist of the path suddenly he shows himself, though but for a moment. The twilight he sits alone on the lonely heath. Thus he orders his comings and goings. Thus, making blow through the heart's forest his wind laden with pain, he goes. Whispering and with murmurs a thought on which he insists repeatedly is man's necessity to God. Thus, day after day, you buy your sunrise in my eyes, 8 he says. In some of these poems his extreme theism Wordsworth, 011 An evening of extraordinary splendor. Cf. Fruit Gathering, 44. Ibid, 77. 234 Rabindranath Tagore Pound shows, a theism so much more definite than ordinary Christian theism that it is the harder to reconcile with the pantheism which is the breath of Hinduism and which appears so abundantly in his work. But he is poet, not theologian, and this passionate individualism of his religion, the very art of his poetic utterance, is his most characteristic contribution on this side. We may be sure this is what he feels and lives by, however passages in prose lectures may seem to contradict. In No. 221 he expresses this by the boldest and strangest, yet most natural metaphor in the world: when the child leaves the womb it sees its mother. When thy affection covers me, I lie hidden in its entrails, and then I know thee not. When thou dost with violence thrust me far from thy sheaver, in that separation find consciousness, I see thy face. In no book is there richer reminiscence of lives dimly living at the roots of what is too vague to be called memory. As he puts it, the dense crowd of what I have not seen surrounds what I have seen. Or again, there is a looker-on who sits behind my eye, 11 a very free rendering of the Bengali, which says in the corner of my heart, at the window of my eyes, thou art gazing in the dawn light. But the texture of Bailiaki is variegated. The Englishman finds in its pages a, not very illuminating, tribute to Shakespeare, from this unlikeliest of admirer. When you arose beyond the distant sea, and England drew you to her breast, then she, zero universal poet, for her own believed you held you hers, and hers alone. A space she kept you, kissing your bright brows, hid in the tangle of her forest boughs, screened with her skirts of fog, within the court whither the elvish tribes for play ran right, with dewy grass and full-blown wildwood flowers made bright. Not yet the island's sylvan bowers had wakened to your praise, zero poet son. But, while the ages calm sequence run, you, at the signal of eternity Ibid. 10. Lover's Gift, 39 Emergence, into world Repufation 235 leaving the horizon's lap, by slow degree have mounted to the noon's bright blazing height, have taken, filling the world's heart with light, your seat I the center. At the age's end, lo, now beside the Indian Sea ascend, where fronded cocoa palms away to the breeze, your praises, crowning the full centuries. Here is an exquisite image and close observation: from a floating cloud suddenly on the river's flow there is the silent walking of a shadow. One of the loveliest poems, 25, shows how richly he takes the passing of youth, this man whose youth has been so abounding and so blessed with good things. The whole lyric is a jet of beauty, from his showering opulence. Spring that in my courtyard used to make such riot once, and buzzing laughter lift, with heap-dripped pomegranate flowers, canchan, parul, rain of paw/as showers, who with new twigs stirred the woods awake, with rosy kisses maddened all the sky. Seeks me out today with soundless feet, where I sit alone. Her steadfast gaze goes out to where the fields and heavens meet, beside my silent cottage, silently she looks and sees the greenness swoon and die into the azure haze. 36-2 is one of his rare mountain poems, and the unfamiliar scenery heightens its striking freshness. Its opening is superb, and the stanzas which succeed bring out with frosty clearness a noble Himalayan picture. The Jhelum's curving stream, glittering in the evening glow, pales with the dark, like a curving scimitar hidden in its sheath. On the day's ebb the tides of night come, bringing their star flowers drifting on the black water. Below the dark mountains the ranks of deodars stand. I feel as if creation wished to speak in its dream, but cannot find clear utterance, only a confusion of wordless sounds murmuring and soughing in the darkness. The new leaves arc red, are the rosy kisses, also, paw/as and pomegranate both have red blossoms. The Fugitive, 3, 29. 236 Rabindranath Tagore. This one's the eponymous Bailiaki poem. He hears a flight of wild swans, winging their way through the skies, mad with the wine of tempest. That rush of their wings, remembering his land's legends of these hills and the events that had taken place among them, he compares to the noise of an apsaras, a heavenly dancer, breaking the meditation of stillness, as those beings had broken the sanctity of saints. The mountains, plunged in blackness, trembled, the deodar forest trembled. This flight of wild lives through the cold skies becomes to the poet the flight of his own and all men's spirits to an unguist goal, and the message of their sounding wings, in the emptiness is, it one's not here, 11 is Othgerware, is Othger White Cray, in some other place. 6. 1. A most touching poem, which remembers his wife, adds yet another streak to the variety of this tulip. No poem is richer in superb image and single lines. The ebb and flow of light and darkness accept each other in the sea of the sky. On either side of the path walk the compames of flowers in their colors, with oundlek steps. This song of loss, profound in its reflection, ranks with his very greatest poems. The mournful cadence carries the reader into the heart of its thought, in the very first strophe. I have looked and looked at it, but dare not try to translate. But I am not going to let the reader pass on without assuring him that the poet's own translation is an insult to his Orig 111 al. In prose, at any rate, it should not have been hard to do better than that. Bailiaci abounds in single lines too happy to be rendered with any approach to adequacy. 11h ends with line cf unsurpassably stormy sound, O my terrible one. Thy forgiveness was in the crashing thunderlamy, in the sunset's writing of ruin. In the tempest of blood rain, in the udden clash of collision. Love Rs gift, 42. Fruit gathering, 36. Emergence, into world reputation 23. I 161 gives impressive speech to his confidence of his poem's destiny. How many unheard words, leaving the homes of the past, whisper in the empty sky. They seek my words on the shores where mankind dwell. It should be added that no poem has a more striking beginning. No less proud and fine is 17, in which he asserts the poet's claim to have part created the beauty which he praises, 0 world. So long as I did not love thee, thy light did not find all its wealth. The vast sky, with lamp in hand, was gazing at its path through space. But, he greatest poems in Bailiaci attain their rank, not by beauty alone, but by sustained power of abstract thought and imagination. The Tajmahal/poem, of which a truncation is given in the first poem of Lover's Gift, is one of these. Its first 16 lines are represented by 3 in the English T. The poem shows some signs of having been written out of resolve rather than impulse, and its ground pattern is a magnificent rhetoric. Its first paragraph has what to us seems a bad conceit, 0 Tajmahal, thy white marble is a solitary teardrop on the cheek of time. But it transcends its limitations. These things are relics from his custom of earlier days, they can be forgotten. For the poem is rich with brooding sense of vanished time, and of the greatness of old days. The Mughal Empire always touches his imagination, and we find an atmosphere as eerie and glamorous as that of hungry stones. His admiration wins from him the greatest tribute he could give, when he calls the Taj the emperor poet's new Meg/Ujita. The jingling of thy beautiful one's anklets, in a corner of the broken palace, dying away with the cicada's cries makes the night sky weep. But my English travesties the text. The poem is a full tide of imagery. Its finish is splendid. The forms of beauty remain, forlorn in their perfection, life has left them, going its endless way. Lover's Gift, 58. 238 Rabindranath 1 AG 0K Today his chariot has gone, at the call of night, at the song of the stars, towards the lion gate of dawn. He never wrote a richer or more decorative poem, and its fame among his countrymen equals that of Urvaisi. YT The poem which follows is finer. The Stream of Being, as it may fitly be called, is the greatest poem in the book, a magnificent psalm of life. As this was the genesis of Bailiaci, I quote the poet's account of its composition. I was in Allahabad, at my nephew's house. One used to have a very quiet time there, in the evening sitting on the terrace. One day, I felt the restfulness of the scene, and everything around me. It was a dark evening. And suddenly there came on me the feeling, there is flowing, rushing all round me that invisible rush of creation, the stars' flecks of foam. J could feel the flow of that dark evening, with all the stars shining, and that current of eternity touched me very deeply. I felt in the heart of two. So I began to write. And when I start writing, one thing leads to the next. That was the beginning of Ba/Ike, the sweep of this impalpable and invisible stream. As these words show, and as the poem shows more clearly, he had launched his boat on its greatest tide, a movement of weighty reflection, of waves iridescent and bubbling with incessant fancy and imagination. The world energy pulses in these lines, which make their way in perfect ease and freedom, the meter responding swiftly to the changing thought within it. It is a picture of the streaming life process, from whose strength and force come the calm and composure of each individual part. It has no pattern save the consummate one which is dictated by internal necessity. Yet even this stream is not without its flowers, for here is a muse who knows no deserts. Blossoms fall continually in showers, jasmine, klumpa, buckule, pearl, fall in thy path from the platter of thy seasons. Nor does he forget earthly rivers, though he calls them by heavenly names. Thy dolcina mat docani, evt, arwellung, labia thd world one isle, cja, hlt it with the bath of death. At length the sky has blossomed io orldalweab. Azure. Zbajhaue. Conversation. Emergence, TNTO world reputation 239. Yet the unseen and eternal governs his passion for the phenomenal and passing. No one realizes that in his blood the waves of thy sea dance, the sea or's restlessness trembles. This thought fills my mind today, that have come, from age to age dropping silently from form to form, from life to life. I have come, using up in gift after gift, in song after song, whatever my hand has gained in night and morning. So we go our ways, drawn to the great stream, from the tumult of the past which lies behind, to bottomless dark, to the shoreless light. 19 Falguni. Nationalism and internationalism. Baliaki did not exhaust his lyrical strength. The close of 1915 and the first month of 1916 were a time when he was supremely happy in song composition, humming for days together, both at Joras Nko and at Bolpur. In 1914, a new and comprehensive edition of his verse and dramas had begun to appear _r, which took several years for completion. Meanwhile came Falguni, the cycle of spring. This is almost an expansion of Autumn Festival, with our friend Thakur dwarfed into simply one and cast for once in an ignodal part. It was written and acted in January 1916, in the courtyard of the Jorasunko house, to raise funds for the famine raging in the district of Bankura. There was a packed house, of what Jikendralal Banerjee unkindly called a motor car audience, plutocratic, cool, MD1 ferent. Not intellectual or even critical, but difficult, unresponsive. They had all taken 10 rupee seats, or looked as if they had. I was one of this unsatisfactory audience and shall recur later to this memorable first night. Guni fell short as literature. It is hard to say this, for the maquet was very dear to its creator. It came as the climax of a period of supreme spiritual and mental excitement, and it was not unnatural that it should have seemed to the poet that tea was the fruit of which the preceding songs had been but the flower. But inspiration was on the ebb, and his mind and nervous system were extremely overtaxed. How overtaxed he himself did not recognize at the moment. As one elder brother, Thakur is grandfather. The Bengali, February 2, 1916. Falguni 241 JL. Banerjee, with whose criticisms I found myself in substantial agreement, said, the conception is thin, and the execution just tolerable. The Mask, his most elaborate essay in this kind, is a spinning out of a central idea which will not bear such treatment. The poet had committed one of his besetting sins, that of plunging into the full sea of composition with inadequate forethought. His failures, which, though many, in the vast variety and abundance of his work show in comparatively trifling proportion, are really due to his facility, which induces him to be content with just one promising conception. This may carry him through a song, but a play requires more. Falguni, then, is incoherent and chaotic, and choked with iteration. The poet deprecated a too serious taking of the Mask's spiritual significance, but this was a vain disclaimer, for the symbolism is too intrusive and clamant. Take it away, and what remains? Well, something remains. But this residue is not drama. But if the main plot must be judged adversely, far more decided must be the opinion pronounced against the long prologue. This is of the very quintessence of thinness, a gossamer which no fairies have woven but the spiders of a very dusty room. The king's concern for the 2 grey hairs which he has discovered is trivial to the point of awakening contempt, and the whole dialogue which is spun round this meagre core of plot is beneath criticism. Flashes of fancy, gleams of wit, there must be and are. But even in execution there has been a relapse to conceits too paltry for examination. The king speaks thus of the 2 hairs which have moved him to such perturbation: the joke is not mine but his, who has got the whole world by the ear and is having his jest. By such a comparison it is not the universe which shrinks into insignificance, but its Lord. Again, could any metaphor be more quaint than this, quite apart from its tremendous theme, the first hint of death's imminence? Death has left his card of invitation behind my ear. This might have been said by the merry monarch who apologized for being 16242 Rabindranath Tagore such an unconscionable time in dying, but not by the terrified and serious craven of Pulguni. So the thin conceits tr.c. Cleon, till they give us this exquisitely fitting picture of the poet whose part, that no clement of absurdity miji one t be wanting, / as taken by Rabindranath himself, and superbly taken. Let your PCT disport H11 NSCLF, jumping about on the top moti branches of HGNJCNLF1, CY. Poets HNCCL bared them CHES to many thin S, H.1 even in their LWN conception part leak spirits beautiful and SW1TT, ILES in caso type PN Machad. Like Cain or Christ, have been pill, rims. Soul, TIR, agers, dreamers. It is hard when a poet himself compare them to white-bearded monkeys, uke as th1e, efrnm ripened mango gm, es, and leap from branch to brar.ch. P. Lil 1111 I might ha /, taken a higher plow if that unhappy introductory one, adher / .rtl / I. LTI1 lie in single images. And the play is lyrically rich. The fatale of songs sometimes attain a airy pure L1111 P1J1 tie, skiite on the lips of childhood, for example, in the prelude of Act 4. LHTLY, Filg 1111 I is in APCE1 al-Sema the poet / O, and man of 2. We might take, as IHNC no do. T he meant you to LL, A, the motto of his own method the watchman's query, dash at your cu dash tom to answer kook tushun, byung. Rabindranath laughing defiance of philosoph, I. YH in the PTH where TLE King AKS Chandra Ekar 1F there I any philosophy 111 the play, to be a circ L, no, NOIC at all, thank good 1E dash, dot. CW Abe Kasi the poet put much intense feeling and con / ICT 11 RN int J file uni that he acted in 1 TW movingly. He 1101H, PIRT, the BL111D poet who C011G dash, Worley Ling Men 2th dot colon, new A / akening. It WA, emphatically one of high favount among high dash, verb. It GA, him great atiration to remember 1 Tux in Germany, in his 1921 tour, and, MOT of all, and IUK 1 LCNTY Hitchschiff.c. L at Liverpool. On one reader. I was so pleel when I had students from Heidelberg and other places. One Tudcut after Ldning stood up and dade in broken English now we heard that an OLL man from the east will come. Falguni 243 one was looking for that old man, but what my surprise that the youth of the Eps speaks to me. The play, when it first appeared, was acted by the Bolpur students and staff and the poet's family. The result was a cast which no other theatre in Bengal could have commanded, of actors who were amateurs but consummate in their art. The poet Ha'el composed his own Mu-5 IC and arranged the staging and had trained little boys to sing the wild spring lyrics. Falgun he translates as April, but Falgun is a month earlier, the Indian spring which floods the ways with the intoxicating scent of mango flowers and thrusts high into heaven the splendid cups bowls, rather of scarlet simul, red and standing like a trumpet's sound. There is a dancing freshness in the blood of man and beast, R&D the groves rock with the mad laughter of the kokils. Kaysen, with its riot of bliss, the poet perfectly five-tossed. The songs were of ravishing beauty, and far more importer than the words of the dialogue. There were boys, al 11105 bai, rm king in leafy wi, igs under hining branches, bundles of Heinringrissen, to use Mr. Banerjek's phrase, a score of articles ir car atci /tcmly. Merrily, h.tll I live now, under the blossom which hangs on the bough. The music was aid by the critics to be influenced by we tcrn music. This Li one poet denied. I cannot say and do not care. All I'll know is, it was wildwood music, such as the knit of the bamboo, the spirit of the south wind, the spiry ones of the flowers, might sing, if they took human voice, a pool irg treble unspoiled by the least touch of self-consciousness in the anchors. Who could wish to criticize, after hearing this? Who could wish to criticize, after seeing the joy-intoxicated dance of TL1E revelers later, singing Amy Ider Keepa Burm LLT makes us wander mad? There was one incongruous figure. Among them, a Tibetan student, most joyously out of place, conversation. Torutud, BA 11 Gmeri. 244 Rabindranath Tagore with bis Mongolian features and his greater age and size, in that festival of childhood. No one who saw him will forget his abandonment of pleasure, as he cracked his thumbs and shouted Amy Ider Keepa Rai. The part of the king was played by Rabindranath Tagore, the poet's nephew, with great dignity and effectiveness. He was always selected for the king parts in his uncle's plays, by merit raised to that bad eminence. His brother, Rabindranath, the well-known painter, had a more difficult role. Pam/its appear in Rabindranath's plays as clergymen do in Shakespeare's or bishops in Matthew Arnold's theological polemic. You always know that they are going to be uncommonly foolish, and, whilst exercising their extraordinary powers, only beating the air, or, in plainer words, busily engaged in talking nonsense. The war between him and Pa 11D1TS was of long standing, and, while they built up the prejudice against him in academic circles, the wounds inflicted by his lighter weapons will last past healing. The part of Srutibitan.h. and the pundit, with all its pompous greed, was magnificently rendered by Rabindranath. But the star performance of the evening was Rabindranath's own rendering of the double parts, of Chandrasekhar and, later, in the masque proper, of Bal the Blind Bard. Mr. Banerjee complains that the motor car audience was cold and B/ASE, I can only say that this was not perceptible to me. They were not as demonstrative as a Bengali audience generally is. But the lyric feast and the acting would have carried through a worse piece, and, as it was, deeply stirred all who saw. The play ended with an unrehearsed dance by all the actors, as Bottom's interlude closed with a Burgo masque. One thing which had made the play so charming was the unaffected friendliness together of the cast. Mr. Willie Pearson, who was an ambassador and had nothing to do but to salame Biril, obiter dicta, Matthew Arnold. Falguni 245 Rabindranath Tagore and speak 2 words of respectful greeting, was garlanded by Rabindranath doing the drama, for no reason but affection. In the final general disp ornament, to te glee of the motor car audience he pranced arm in arm with Ajit Kumar Chakravarti. Deko, Sahib Nayak Karch he won, see, the Sahib is dancing. The revelry continued, long after the play was finished, behind the scenes, where I found the poet exhausted but happy. I saw him next day, when he was to return with me to Bankura. but his nervous energy was drained. When the mood held him, he had demonic vigor, but it ebbed suddenly and completely. Press notices had begun, and he was discouraged by the play's mixed reception. 2 days after, he was on the edge of collapse. He cancelled his arrangements, and fled from Calcutta to the wild ducks and reed beds of Shailyada, where he rested. But he could never remain absolutely quiescent, and now from time to time he blazed out, with an expenditure of nervous energy and of peace of mind which he could not spare. He wrote Strirputra, a woman's letter from Puri, a bitter letter voicing a woman's social wrongs. The supposed writer has left her husband's house, disgusted because he married a young girl who was their ward to a lunatic. The letter was Rabindranath's protest against the ignoring of woman's rights and interests, and the contemptuous refusal to look at her point of view. A leading patriot replied with a sequel in which he had no difficulty in showing what a very bad woman this discontented one was. A woman's place is her home, of which she is such a beautiful ornament, so long as she looks after husband and children and leaves all business to wiser heads. Then Rabindranath made one of his fiercest incursions into politics, by articles on the once notorious Presidency College assault. The bias of his mind was turning against the West. It had been doing so ever since the outbreak of war. To him the war was a matter of such appalling horror that in it he could see nothing but proof, flaming heaven high, of the seething one led by Subhas Chandra Bose. 246 Rabindranath Tagore and bottomless iniquity of Western nations. Not the least trouble was that he had been working far too hard. I remember him taking an important Brahmo meeting in January _1916. The Jorasunko house was packed to the side gyms and verandas. He sat in the far midst, absorbed in meditation, a rapt praying figure, the mind giving out from all its depths and powers. The same month, he wrote The Home and the World, at fever haste, immediately after Philguni. This is essentially a psychological and introspective novel, for it is not to be supposed that ordinary folk would understand and portray themselves as accurately as they do here. The scheme of The Ring and the Book is adapted. English literature served him well again, in setting his mind working to such result. Following on such a songtide and on Philguni, the book is a great proof of the vigor of his inspiration. Nikhil and Hai, Master are excellently conceived characters. In Amulya, that piece of childhood thrown away, see what sacrifices were demanded by the cruel deity of racial hatred. Bimala, the superficially attractive, yet deeply commonplace woman, is less clearly drawn. Yet, he is human. Neither for her, nor even for the base self-worshipping Sundeep, do we, all sympathy. The novel would always keep an itch, if only for its historical interest, as the best picture of Bengal's time of political awakening. But its human interest and its literary merit have never won due recognition, and should keep it alive more surely. One passage, where one kill mine tr nel hack in reminiscence to all that High Brother's wife had happened to him, a wistful turning back of memory to Rabindranath's own loss in early manhood, and the kindness of a sister-in-law. The novel more modern in tone than anything which Bengali fiction /scd. It was much attacked, first, as immoral, secondly, as unpatriotic. After all effort, in such varied kinds, his mind was ready to snap. Angry tongues had wagged over Philguni, over The Home and the World, over the Presidency College episode. Friendships were trained, and in some cases the trouble was to leave its trace for many a day. It is too foul